What's up, guys? Ryan Schultz here from E39 Source in San Diego, California. It's not often I get an opportunity to make a video that does not yet exist, and I believe that's what we're doing here today on the BMW E52 Z8. This will be a fuel filter DIY, very similar to the E39 M5 in principle, but a different application as this is a completely different chassis. This car is in for a fairly significant amount of work. Complete super sprint exhaust from the exhaust valves back here to the tailpipes. Got Bilstein coilover suspension going in, custom made for this car. And while it's here, he's having us do a couple little additional jobs, such as front brake rotors and the fuel filter. So without further ado, let's jump in. This will be the same process between the S62 and the M62 Z8. The Alpina used the M62 V8 engine, whereas this car, the standard car, used the E39 M5's S62. Now the primary difference, and we start to see this back here at the fuel tank, is that the fuel is delivered up the right side of the car, where the E39 delivers the fuel on the left side of the car. So what we'll need to do today is remove several Torx, 10, maybe some 8mm fasteners, and ultimately remove this heavy-duty, thick plastic underbelly panel here to gain access to the fuel filter. We only need two parts for this job. Number one is a fuel filter. I like the Hengst brand. That's the original equipment manufacturer for BMW. It's the H272WK. I will include the 11-digit BMW part number in the description below this video. We will also need one of these copper crush washers, BMW number 071199633129. That will go in between the fuel filter and the pressure regulator assembly. I've sparsely populated the tool cart here to start at least. Got an electric wrench and ratchet. I have two hand 3/8 drive ratchets. It's a BMW, so you know there's going to be some pop rivets or push rivets somewhere. I've got a tool to remove those. Two flatheads and a Phillips for good measure. In terms of sockets, I do believe we'll need a T30 and a 10 and an extension at a minimum. I'm going to start in the rear and firstly remove this 10mm fastener all the way just in front of the rear right wheel arch. Then we've got a T30, a T30, a T30, all the way up until we see three more 10mm fasteners. Let's begin with those, pull those out, put them in a dry safe location. So up here in the front, we discovered three 10mm fasteners. The two that go into this more forward panel are a longer length than the one that goes in the main panel that comes all the way back. And I'm just going to keep them in order. You can see the difference in length there. The 10mm fastener in the rear is different. It's black. That'll be hard to misplace. And the rest of these Torx 30s are all identical. The first thing you'll notice after removing all those fasteners is that this panel is still very much tightly installed on the car. I can't even move it. So there's more holding this in. And if we take a look under the side body panel here, we can see the head of a whole bunch more screws. They appear to be T30s. So to gain better access to those, we'll need to remove these plastic clips that are up in this panel. These look like nothing I've ever seen on an E39, but they work the same way. These are standard push rivets. They don't twist, they don't screw, they don't turn. They need to be pried out. There'll be a two-piece rivet, and as suspected, we'll need a tool like this to do it. Here's a better look at that connector. It's standard push rivet, except it's got a square post in there, so it only goes in the one way. You pry out the middle about that far, and then pry the rest of it out carefully around the bodywork. There's a total of 8 of those rivets, and with those out, you'll see that we've got just enough room to pull the bodywork down, and indeed see that those are Torx 30 fasteners in there that we can now remove with a socket or wrench or an electric ratchet. After removing a total of 8 Torx screws, you'll see that this metal plate has now become quite loose, and it's just a matter of sliding it out of here. It's heavier than it looks, and it's a great time to clean this thing up inside and out. With the cover off, we'll find that we have an entire view of the fuel filter right here, and we'll be able to see two 10mm nuts up here in the shadows holding the filter onto the car by use of these brackets. Remove the two 10mm nuts and you'll find that the fuel filter kind of drops down off of its perch, but not quite enough to service it yet. If you follow the fuel filter back a few inches, you'll see that the 3 fuel hoses pop into that black plastic bracket there. And with a little bit of force applied in the right direction, you'll be able to pop those lines out, which will allow it to hang lower. Before we remove any of the hoses, we're going to bleed the excess fuel pressure out of the filter and fuel lines. We'll see a little Schrader valve cap right here. You can unscrew that, get some sort of a bucket or container, and then a flathead screwdriver. Press that valve in until it stops dripping while collecting the fuel. How much fuel you drain from the filter and pressure regulator will be entirely dependent on when the car was last driven, started, or operated. This car hasn't run for a few days, so I got a very small amount of fuel out of there. Now we're ready to start disconnecting the hoses from the filter itself. And it's important to note that you should get some sort of a tray, pan, or bucket here as we remove these hoses and the fuel pump changes orientation and orients in a more vertical position. We will certainly drain more fuel out of this system, significantly more than we just did up here at the pressure regulator. I like to start in the back, and we'll immediately see that it's the same type of quick disconnect hose that the E39 M5 uses. The way these things work is you want to take the hose and push it in towards the filter like you're installing it, about as much as you can. From that point, we'll take a tool, like our pop rivet removal tool here, wedge that gently in between the fuel filter and the feed line, and press this black part into the hose as far as we possibly can. When this collar at the outside of the plastic piece is resting against the hose itself, we'll easily be able to take the hose and slide it off the fuel filter towards the rear. The front of the Z8 is to my left and the rear to the right. I've got a total of 3 quick connect hoses. Feed lines here at the back, that's the one we filmed before. And we've got a return coming out of the pressure regulator here. That'll be on the left or inboard side of the car. And in application, it's this blue hose. It turns into a little black flexible hose and then has the quick connect fitting. And the output line to the engine comes straight out the front. A final and fourth point of connection here is a small vacuum line up here at this diaphragm. And it just pushes over that nipple. Usually on the M5, these are extremely brittle and fall apart and turn to dust. This one pulled off with no drama at all. The new filter's on the right. Let's do a quick comparison here. So we see that they're both Hengst brand, H272WK. That has not changed. The old one's July 19th, year 2000. And our new one has a bit of a different format, 19DYH. I'm not sure what that means. I don't see anything else on here. So I will take a paint pen, write today's date, and E39 Source LLC on this filter. Now the new filter comes with these rubber sleeves here. So what I like to do is just line the new filter up exactly with the old one and push those around to where they need to be. Looks like the one on the right needs to move forwards, and that one's pretty spot on, maybe a little bit forwards. Obviously we'll move our brackets over, keeping them in the same orientation. And most importantly, we need to move over the pressure regulator assembly here. So we'll see that this fitting comes with the new filter. So we're going to take this off of the fitting, and we can look in there and see that that's where our new copper crush washer is going to go. Now this is a lot easier if you've got a vise and you don't need a lot of force on this. I take something like a shop towel to put in between the vise and the pressure regulator so we don't mar it. Just snug it down a little bit to hold it in place. That's a square, and just make sure you leave your Schrader valve sticking out like that so you don't crush it. It's a 19mm nut here, so we'll just put that on there and unthread the fuel filter and fitting from the pressure regulator. The new filter has a little cap on this end. Obviously we'll take that off. We'll take our crush washer, drop that in place. And after a quick little cleanup in those threads, I'm going to snug this down by hand and then just a little bit more with the wrench so it's nice and tight. I don't have a torque spec for this. They've never published one, but with that washer there, we don't need an incredible amount of force. Fuel filter installation is the exact same process as removal. These quick connect clips are very satisfying to push into place. You'll know when it's all the way on when you get a nice satisfying click. 3 of those for the 3 pressure lines. Rubber hose in the front. Don't forget to replace the Schrader valve. And before you put on the rear or the initial feed line here, make sure that you put your clamps in place. The 2 10mm nuts will torque down to 71 inch-pounds. They're M6 by 1.0, 8.8 grade fasteners. A few minutes in the parts washer has made a tremendous difference on the underbody panel. Did both sides, just got a lot of dirt, debris, and road gunk off. This is the underside. Of course, it's picked up a few stone chips there, but that's nice and clean now. We're going to put that back in place. If you have a need to replace any broken or missing fasteners that hold that bodywork on, it's part number 14 on the diagram, and the part number is 51718174894. And we're back together. It's pretty easy to get that panel back in alignment. Take a look at the heads on the bolts that we're putting back in, the T30s here and the T30s on the inside. If that's an 8.8 grade M6 by 1 thread, it's 71 inch-pounds, and if it's a 10.9, we're going to be going down to 107 inch-pounds. Before you start your Z8, put the key in position 2 and wait about 5 seconds, then turn it off and do the same thing 3 or 4 more times. That'll allow the fuel pump to build up some pressure and fill up our new filter. So when you do press that start button, it'll fire right up. Thank you for watching this video. As usual, leave any comments and questions down below, and we'll talk in the next E39 Source video. Take care.